Welcome to Your Trust Stack, a podcast by GGWP, where I talk to operators, engineers, and policy leaders about how trust and safety works in practice. I'm your host, Joy Pagorni, and this episode we are joined by Nate Sawatzky from Supercell. And hello, we are here with Nate Sawatzky from Supercell, but I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Thanks. So I am Nathan Sawatzky. I have been building and leading the trust and safety team at Supercell for the past 6.5 years. Before that, I spent lots of time in different parts of the industry, working with Meta, starting way back in the day with a product called Club Penguin, and then with Disney for a while. But through most of my career, similar to you, Joy, it has been focused on how do we care for young, vulnerable people in online digital spaces.
Yeah, and I put an R in your name. Apologies for that. I've got so many consonants in my name, I just start giving them out to other people, so apologies for that. Yeah, so I thought because we're two grizzled veterans in the trust and safety space, we could obviously talk about some of the topics that you have addressed in your time at Supercell, but we can also touch on any of the other myriad of projects that you've worked in the past. And I think the stuff that I want to talk about today with you is stuff that we've been dealing with for the last couple decades. Specifically, the first one I want to touch on is safety by design. So Supercell's games are built around clans, strangers meeting to cooperate with each other. How do you guys integrate trust and safety into the game mechanics itself? Before the moderators even get involved, is there integration at the design layer? Do you push that as part of the trust and safety team, or is that embedded within the company culture? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think even kind of before the concept of safety by design, which I think is a super important construct, it really does come down to company culture. And Supercell, for its entire existence, has always been very much a player-first company. And it has kind of this strong moral code in the way that we do things. And so care for the player has always been really central to the way that we do things. And it's kind of embedded into the game design. Things like, for example, mobile games can sometimes be the sort of thing that draw you in and keep calling you back to it. Our games, we tend to kind of think about safety in the sense that, for example, if you're playing Brawl Stars, after you've played for about 55 minutes, there's really diminishing returns on how long you play. If you want to play for longer, by all means, play for as long as you want. But we're not designing into it any sort of like reasons for you to kind of play for the next 2-3 hours. We're not kind of nudging you over and over again saying, hey, please come back and play the game. And I think it's just an example of like the way that Supercell approaches game design. So then whenever we think about safety, we understand that social is in support of play. It's one of our first principles whenever we think about applying trust and safety by design. So we're not trying to be a platform where, anybody can say anything and have any conversation that they want. We predominantly want to make sure that whenever you're playing our games, the social supports that play. And so when you think about the filter, when we think about the way that we kind of provide responses to players whenever they act in a disruptive way, all of that is kind of to make sure that social is in support of play.
That's great. That's great. And it feels like it's a company value so that the other teams are really showing up for those conversations as well.
Yeah, I feel fortunate. I've never had to fight within Supercell to convince people that we should do the right thing. And on the term of safety by design, even a lot of kind of whenever we talk about it within the company, whenever we talk about it within the trust and safety and the player care group, we actually often use the term civility by design. Because we think that like a civil society is always going to be a safer society. And so a lot of what we do is kind of mixes in that pro-social element, and how do we try and make sure that people understand what this sort of space is for and why people would show up to that space and what it means to kind of be not just like not a jerk, but also the sort of person that is kind and warm and invites other people into play.
So it kind of sounds like it's embedded even in the game design. So would you say that it's involved at the conception of the games as well as pre-launch from a logistics point of view and post-launch from a execution?
Yeah, but like you said, it's very much at like a company values. We don't have, for example, a rule book or a playbook. There's not a a process by which games, whenever they start to think about social features, they go through. And we're very much a company that doesn't like checklists. So it really does come down to that constant nurturing in the company culture to make sure that the sort of stuff that we would naturally produce would check those boxes if we had boxes to check.
Yeah. Well, you have been fortunate in your career to have had some communities that have been long-term communities. Um, at Supercell, Clash of Clans has been around for over a decade. You were at Club Penguin, which was uh, a household name in most families for a while. Do you find that the brass tacks of trust and safety and the different things that you think about encompassing trust and safety are different when are inherently different when the game and the community is young as opposed to a older community, or like what are some of the factors that change over time?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, you and I met when we were both back in the day, kind of looking after, some of the most important communities for young people online. And when I think back to those days, and even to whenever I think back to the sort of companies, there's not a lot of companies that are really trying to do something really just for kids nowadays. And whenever I think back to those days where we were nurturing child communities, a lot of it was about education, or not. We never would have said it; it would have made it sound awful. But like, how do we help young people understand what is and isn't okay online? And that concept, I think developed it over the years. I started calling it restorative moderation, which is this way of being able to say, look, like, we know that a lot of the sort of disruptive behavior that happens online, particularly by young people, isn't necessarily what it looks like. So, for example, you might have a young boy who is playing out a misogynistic character, and they're saying things that are just awful. They're probably not yet, at least, a misogynist. They might be on the path to that, but we have an opportunity to intervene and to be able to provide the right sort of feedback. And I think that's the key difference. Whenever we think about working with young people online, we still have the opportunity to help shape what they will become. And as they learn to be social in the real world, in the physical world, and as they learn to be social in the digital world, if we can find the right ways to be able to feed back to them why that sort of behavior is inappropriate, as opposed to simply just saying, like, you're banned, you said hateful things. If we can give that feedback, that at least in theory, we can help direct what they will be. And some of the stuff that we've done, particularly with young people in Supercell games, is we've seen a correlation between whenever we provide that sort of feedback that is very specific feedback about the sort of behavior that they're portraying. One of the key metrics that we look at one of the key metrics that we look at is recidivism, and we can see that recidivism drop off, and that's something that we want to continue to focus on. When we're dealing with adults, obviously that sort of like feedback mechanism is also important, but I think, at least in theory again, we're telling them, hey, you know that behavior isn't appropriate because you're an adult, and we're going to enforce it here. So it's more about saying, we're actually going to follow through on what our community guidelines say, as opposed to trying to help change that behavior.
Yeah, I have a fun story that I always tell about how, especially with kids, that the parents are part of the education as well. I would have often when I was handling all the parts of live ops, including customer service and billing and all that fun stuff, we'd often have parents who would call in because their child was banned or got some sort of disciplinary action or some sort of message that was saying that their little angel was not doing things according to the way that they thought that they were. And I used to say that I would have to hold parents' hands through the difficult epiphany that their child was starting a credit card fraud ring, trying to start one, and I found out on the game. Um, but it is about having respect for those moments, whether it is the 13-year-old who may have watched a couple memes that have taken them into an area of the internet that you didn't want them to be in, or whether it's the 9-year-old who just got super excited that everyone likes their virtual item that they were selling, and they came up with a way to sell more of them that maybe was against the rules and they didn't realize. Not everybody has the intentions. Another phrase that I use all the time is using benefit, live in benefit of the doubt land. And until they prove you that you shouldn't be in there, a lot of people sometimes really actually don't know, or had a suspension of not disbelief, but a suspension of like common sense. And if you just have a little bit of empathy and a little bit of grace with them, they'll come back. And if you do it nicely, if you're abrupt and you just go right with the band hammer, you're going to have a harder time of bringing them back to the fold of kind of what you want the culture to look like.
Yeah, and I think that's it's really true. One of the things that, and again, I know you'll relate to this. When you're doing moderation, when you're doing the actual work of moderation, it becomes really easy to become cynical and to view the world as bad. And it's one of the things that we work on with our content moderation teams. And it's one of the things that even personally within our team we think about a lot is how do we avoid becoming cynical. Our job is to look at the kind of the harsher stuff, but one of the big parts of the training of our content moderation teams is we get them to think through how do you see the other side. So for example, whenever somebody says something that seems inappropriate, it in fact might be inappropriate, but it also just might be inappropriate within one context. And whenever you think about where they're from in the world, you have to understand that the worldview in that part of the world might be different. And another one of our first principles, and this is like a super spicy one. There's a way better way to say this. So what we say is that we're guided by Western democratic values. And again, you can dismantle and take apart, well, what on earth does that mean? But what we're trying to say is, look, we want to bring in people from all over the world into our games. And we know that there are people that are going to be playing our games that are from parts of the world that they believe something very different than what we would believe within our culture. And Supercell is, for example, a Finnish company, very proudly Finnish. And a lot of the views and the ways that we think about our community guidelines and our policies are really shaped by Finnish culture. And so, for example, we might bring somebody into our games who is from a culture where they view women very differently than we would view women within our culture. And they're welcome to be part of our community. In fact, we want them to be part of our communities. We want them to engage. We want them even to be able to be authentically who they are. But our policies are set up to say, look, the one thing that we have to agree on is that we view men and women as both equally valuable. And your culture may talk about things a little bit differently. But whenever you're in our community, you have to be able to participate in the way that we see this. We're not going to be okay with you sharing that. So whenever we think about it, though, it would be really easy as a content moderator to see somebody say something from that culture and go like, oh, that's hateful. And it is. Within our cultural worldview, it is. But we also know that we're going to need to be able to help them understand that within this context, that's not okay. Within their context, it might be completely acceptable, but within our context, it's not. So the way that we train our moderators to be able to even think empathetically about that, to be able to understand that thing, this may not necessarily be a bad person. It's a person that has a different worldview, and we're going to call them to our worldview, and particularly in this space. But we want to make sure that our moderators, that ourselves, we're not becoming cynical to those people. That people are coming from all sorts of different walks of life with all sorts of different experiences, and we want to be empathetic to that while still maintaining what our communities are going to be about.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's so important to have an allegiance to that value as a team and to make sure that they stand by it. Um, and and then that brings the empathy to the other people. So you can say, I get that you don't agree with this. That's your thing, but this is what we do here. And you'll probably be able to find another community that maybe suits you a little bit better. And that works when you're talking to people face to face, when you're dealing with teams and management issues, but it also deals in moderation and audience management sort of situations as well. Just having that empathy to be like, I get that you're frustrated. Yeah, I hear you. It's still not allowed. You're
Yeah,
still not allowed to do that here.
yeah,
And I think a lot of people are afraid to do that, but if you have it's not, and it sounds like Supercell has this, but if you have the company behind you, you have your managers behind you, you can have a strong viewpoint about what the rule is, and you can stick by it, but you could be nice while you're doing it. You don't have to be angry and mean and judgy when you do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I would imagine that Supercell runs in autonomous cells, either by, I think my understanding is correct, that you have separate teams that run each of the different games. And then you have what they're calling a hub and spoke kind of thing, where you have like the values, and then, but each team kind of executes on said values on their own and maybe has some central resources that are available to them, but they, for the most part, run in autonomous teams. If that is the case, and I think it is, how do you make sure that certain games aren't being under resourced in certain ways as far as trust and safety goes? And then, if you have a strong personality, which sometimes happens in autonomous cell sort of situations, that maybe is pushing forth another kind of viewpoint, I'm sure you lean on those company values, but like, what are other things that happen in those situations?
Yeah, so Supercell is, we are a unique company in a lot of ways. And the name Supercell kind of, it speaks to the fact that we have these cells that have incredible independence. And so, yeah, each of the game teams operates very much its own way, which as a central team is tricky because it means that it's not a common way that we can communicate with each of the game teams. We don't have like, well, this is the role that exists on each of the game teams that we know we interface with. That I think the other side to that also is we also have that level of independence, and so we are trusted to make decisions that are going to be in the best interest of our players, and the game teams are incredibly supportive of that as well. So it really does come down to trying to figure out what our common goal is. So Supercell's mission is to create games for as many people as possible to play for a long time and remember for forever. And if we're going to do that, our function within the trust and safety team is like people will remember a bad experience for a long time. We want them to remember our games for the right reasons. And if we want people to stay in our games and play our games for a long time, it means that we need to ensure that the games aren't filled with people that are pushing other people away. It's really to protect our business. So as long as we have that common language, whenever we approach game teams and we say, hey, we have an idea that we can improve the well-being of players or the safety of players, the toughest thing is the resourcing piece, because the game teams are by design smaller than a normal game team. We do try to operate with as small a teams as possible, and we've grown a lot over the years, and the game teams are much bigger than they used to be. But I think it means for us, one of the ways that we have to think about it is how can we do as much as possible with our own resources? So meaning we have a dev team within trust and safety that actually does get involved in game code from time to time, and that's built through trust. Obviously, it's not an easy thing to relinquish, to somebody outside to come in, but that's the way that we function with this default to trust mentality. But beyond that, it really is just about finding that common language to say, look, we know that we want to achieve this with this town hall, for example, and if we're going to do that, it means we're going to have these features, and so in order to support that, we need to be as early as possible thinking through what are the things where there could be potential risk, or there could be potential harm. How do we build a toolkit that is adaptable and flexible, that it can bend and mold into whatever situation the game team decides to go? And sometimes we get it right, which is fantastic, and other times not so much. And that's like another part of our culture is we celebrate failure. Not that we encourage failure, that we chase failure, but rather that we say, hey, look, like we had a big bet and we messed up on this one. And that's, again, it's a shared goal between the teams, and it's that shared goal, that shared mission that allows us to try and find the touch points to do that. But it's not easy. We are, again, also a relatively small team. Supercell has many hundreds of millions of monthly active users. So how do we be able to do all of this at scale? And it really just comes down to kind of like really aggressively prioritizing the things that we know are going to have the biggest impact.
Do you then, I would assume, do a lot of shared tech and a lot of shared software, or do some of the teams have their own? And obviously, I'm speaking in the trust and safety sense. But I mean, I could ask for other things, for billing, for customer service. Do you have different actual different software being used in the different cells, or do you pretty much share the same kind of software stack across the
Yeah, so
across them?
we have common tech, and we have a central tech team that builds tech that can be used by all of the games. Doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be forced, but whenever we think about like in the player care group, so within support and within trust and safety, yeah, we try and keep it as common as possible. And the tech that we use, we try and make sure that it's as flexible as possible so that we're not restricting any creativity on the game team side. But for example, this past year, the trust and safety team built a better way of being able to do filtering within our games, meaning rather than the game team having to integrate with whatever filtering company we're working with, we built a kind of a port where essentially they send the text to get checked, and it's agnostic to what's on the other side of that, which allows us to be able to say, hey, let's try this filter tech, or let's try this thing, or let's try this thing. So we try to make it as flexible as possible so the game team doesn't have to worry about what's happening on this side. They trust us to manage what's happening on this side, and we give them that common API point that they can use and every game team can use. And that works mostly.
That's great. What about features? Like kind of going back to that again, buzzword of safety by design. But are there features that either you were or were not involved in? And again, this can be across your career. It doesn't necessarily have to be Supercell, but that maybe you were or were not involved in at the design process, and when they landed inside of the game with the live moments that were happened were had a different impact than maybe you had imagined. And yeah,
Yeah, for
maybe
sure.
talk about, we all have fun stories about as far as that goes.
For sure. And it's one of those reasons why the communication and the relationship between what we do and the game teams is critical. Whenever that gets weak or whenever it's not fostered as well as it should, yeah, sometimes a feature will show up, and the feature, by all accounts, should just be a normal feature. There shouldn't be this thing that is like could go wrong. But sometimes we in trust and safety, we have a mind to be able to see how everything could be wrong, and that's maybe one of our superpowers. It also ruins most of our social experiences because we can't unsee things. But for example, actually, this is a funny story which will change the rating of this podcast. But back at Club Penguin, I remember one of the artists came up with this really great costume, and it got really close to going live, and it was like you could become like a ketchup bottle or a mustard bottle, and it was great. You walk out and you're a penguin, and you're a mustard bottle, and then you could dance, right? And there's this penguin dance. But in this case, whenever you danced, the bottle squirted things out. And, to the artists, to the creative teams, it was like, this is hilarious. The trust and safety team, we saw it, we're like, absolutely not.
As you were telling the story, I was like, oh no,
Yeah,
slow
exactly.
motion.
Everybody listening to this will be like, how could they not see it? But yeah, it's one of those things we're trained to see things in the worst possible light sometimes. I used to tell my teams that, whenever they would start, we were going to make going to the nightclubs just awful because they would only be able to listen to the lyrics of the songs. Another penguin story was we had one of our catalogs. There was lots of candy stuff, and it was around the time that 50 Cent's released Candy Shop, and suddenly candy shops in Club Penguin meant something completely different. So like it's sometimes it's pop culture that changes the context of something, and nobody could have been prepared for it. Other times you just you see the things that others won't see, and again, it comes down to communication in those cases where something is released that maybe creates risk, whether it be brand risk because of disruption or real world harm. Our job within trust and safety is not to be able to go and slap hands and say like, you shouldn't have done this. It's first to kind of figure out, okay, how do we move forward, how do we fix this. Secondly, how did we not get to the point where we could have been part of that conversation? And sometimes that's looking inside. Have we been too busy? Have we been too heads down? Sometimes it's on the game team side saying, hey, look, we need for you guys to remember that we can help you with this and we can help avoid these sort of things. But it's about that trust, that relationship, that communication.
Yeah, and postmortems are so important because you can have the moment to say, was this because we weren't involved in the design phase and we could have seen a ketchup mustard situation way before it ever got to print? Or is it a situation that you couldn't have predicted this? This is just something of the amazing ingenuity of the audience coming up with, and you couldn't have done it. And then is it a crisis management moment where you have to talk about that process? But both are process. Both are, should we be involved, or how do we handle a situation that maybe has spiraled into a place that we didn't want it to go? But they're both process things, and postmortems and retros on moments that happen is always like the best way, I think, to make that happen.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to keep you forever. I know you've got all kinds of fun, important stuff to do, but this has been awesome. It's always great to talk to you.
It's always good to talk to you, Joy.
And we usually spend at least a little bit of time waxing poetic on the decades that we've been doing this. But I'm glad that we got to talk about some of your more current projects and some of the more current projects that you've been working on. Is there anything you have coming up that you want to promote or talk about, or maybe talk about where people can find you?
Yeah, I mean, find me on LinkedIn. I have a very poorly managed blog that, has, I think the last blog post was over a year ago, but it's nathansawatzky.com. But yeah, I think it's a small space, and I think we were talking about this actually the last time that we were together at the event in London. It's neat to see all of the new people that are coming into the space. I think trust and safety at one point was very much this niche. People were kind of in this little sphere, and we're starting to see more and more people come in and participate. And I'm keen to see where it goes. But I think us sharing some of these old stories and welcoming people, and then for us to listen to new ideas that are coming in, I get excited to talk to people that are in this space. So please reach out.
Yeah. And we're community people, so we love having the community grow and seeing it welcome more people into it. So, well, thank you so much for chatting with me today, and I can't wait to see you at the next event.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jay.